5 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in this Tuesday morning. When you are a fan of a novelist, you become familiar with the characters that the novelist has introduced you to through his or her writing, right? And they become part of you. They only exist in words, and yet they become real for you. Well, if they become real for you, just imagine how real they must be for those authors, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's an amazing thing to kind of contemplate just for a second. So some of these people who seem real to us, who really truly are out of the imaginations of some amazingly talented and creative people that we call authors, they wouldn't even be in our lives, right? How many, like, we're coming up to a time of year where these stories keep getting repeated, right?
Yes.
Oh, the holiday stories that you keep hearing every year, right? Oh my gosh, they're so real, and yet in many cases, I'm sure some of them are real, but in many cases they're not. Where's it? What did I do with the book? The book is called She Read to Us in the Late Afternoons, A Life in Novels. Kathleen Hill has explored this very concept in this book, and we're going to find out about it now. Kathleen teaches in the Master of Fine Arts program at Sarah Lawrence College, and she's herself an award-winning best-selling author. Good morning, Kathleen. Thank you for being on the show with us.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here.
Where are you?
Well, I'm in New York right at this moment, and I was just thinking about you in Florida. You know, there's going to be a big storm this afternoon, evidently, big thunderstorms, but I don't know.
What?
I see little patches of blue. I don't know. You're wondering what is happening, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you making this
She's
up?
psychic.
Are you looking at the Weather Channel? Where do you see this?
Well, I'm looking out the window, actually, and I'm looking at the trees are beginning to blow quite violently. There's all gray now. A minute ago it was blue, but now it's gray. They say big thunderstorms are going to come by, roll across the sky. So it's an odd date for my book to come out. This is the day the book comes out.
Wow.
And I'm looking out the window, and I see everything thrashing around.
Wow. Well, so
odd, isn't it?
I think I'm going to do the weather that way from now on.
I think it's a good idea.
It's very interesting. I'm just looking out at it, and people are, sort of hunkering down now, and, well, we'll see what happens,
Wow.
You don't know. But I'm thinking of you, of course, that have seen so many storms and hurricanes and all, and now here it seems to be coming, but just for, not.
So when you are looking back at your own life, and
Yes.
in this book you are, do the real things seem as real? Or no, let me ask it the other way. Do the fictional things that you created or that were created through you, maybe that's a better way of saying this, do they seem as real as the real things? And do they ever become confusing?
Yes, that's a wonderful question. They do. I find if I'm writing about a time in my life, for example, in that first one about the music teacher and the boy and all of that, I remember some things very clearly that are taken from there. But parts of it, I don't know exactly what I made up and what I didn't. And when I try now, I back away, I say, well, what actually did happen? I really can't say. It's as if writing about it changed it in my imagination in some way, that it almost replaces what. But then again, what did happen? That's the question. You don't know,
Kathleen. Have you ever created a character? I mean, a character you really invested a lot in.
Yes.
And then later on in life, met a person who had the exact same name, but they didn't know that you were the author who made up that name, even though they may not have even read the book. Have you ever met that person, like later on?
Well, I haven't the name, no. Not the name, but I have found that, for example, in that first story with Miss Hughes, the music teacher, I sometimes hear her voice telling me things, just as she did. She told, she was this charismatic music teacher to these 7th graders, they were all 12 years old. And she really made confidants of these children and told them about her life and was very passionate about music. And she said some things to us that I know are accurate, that are in that story. But I can't be sure every word she said. But I do hear her words come back to me at certain critical moments. I say, oh, yes, Miss Hughes said that. And I do know for sure there is one thing she said to a child in that class, a boy who was also 12 years old, in a tragic family situation that, really was just sort of horrendous. And nobody knew what to do. None of the other kids knew how to approach. In fact, they didn't want to get near him. You know how children are. They just, it's too much.
Yes.
And she stood in front of the class in a moment of quiet, and she said, and I know this is true, she said, "Is there anything we can do for you, Norman?" She pronounced those words. They're just seared into my memory from when I was 12. And in doing that, she showed us the way to touch somebody who was isolated and suffering. And that made an impression that I have never forgotten. And I know those were her words. Some of the ones I put there I don't really know. But those words I know. Is there anything I can do for you, Norman? I know she said those words.
And that's very important, because when children are growing up, the parents try to protect their children from not so nice things that are happening, and they don't talk about it, they don't discuss it, so you don't know how to react as a child. But this teacher was very insightful to include all the other children, so he wouldn't feel as an outcast, and they wouldn't be confused with how they should react.
Exactly. And she also says you mustn't judge, you don't know about other people's lives. You mustn't gossip about people when you know nothing about them, and gossip about their lives. She taught us some things that I've never forgotten. It doesn't mean I've never done those things, sadly, but I remember them. And so, she made an extraordinary difference, because she saw art, or music in this case, music as that would be our consolation. Life was difficult, as she says. It will not spare you, boys and girls. It spares no one. It will be painful. It will be difficult. But music will be your consolation and your support. Now, I would put in there, novels, of course, or poetry, or somebody else would put in something else, whatever it is, And she also, in the midst of that, she was trying to show us how to lead a life that was worthy, that was not mean and bitter and gossipy,
Mm-hmm.
So, she did those two things, and I think that character, I don't know how true. Sometimes I wonder, and I think, suppose I saw a film of that class. Would I be astonished that the story has departed so far? I don't know, but there's no way of knowing. Maybe it hasn't.
Do you, as an author, have an obligation to remain in character? I've often wondered this about, we speak to authors all the time, and quite often they will tell us, well, I'm Kathleen Hill in this book, but I use another name in another book because I don't want my readers to be confused with the genres. And I've often thought, is that really, you've done all this work to make a name for yourself, and now you have to be somebody else. Is there an obligation to remain in character? I mean, right now, the way you're talking, it sounds like you want to give me cookies and milk. But, you got that sweet voice, Are you the author of Sugar Daddy's Secret, or is that a different Kathleen Hill?
Oh, that's a different Kathleen Hill.
Oh, okay. That's what...
That's a different Kathleen Hill.
All right, that's why I was wondering. Okay.
But the Secrets of Something, no, I didn't write that one.
Okay. So, but I mean, the question is still there. Do you have to remain in character as the author? Well,
I think that authors are recognizable from one book to another.
Yes.
Don't you? I mean, you don't even have to have the name. If somebody knows your work and they read a book,
enough,
if you've read enough of that person and you read another book, even without the name, you might recognize them. Maybe not, but you might. And I don't know. I feel that we only have one voice to speak with. We may change it from book to book in some way, depending on what we're writing about. It may be different. A character would bring out different things. Say, Miss Hughes would bring out a different thing from, when you were speaking before about Madame Bovary, that section in France there was a whole different thing going on. So, it's various, but I think there's a deeper sort of voice that you hear, or I feel that in the books of the writers I love. I hear the same sort of voice behind it all, or I don't know.
Since you have had the opportunity to live in different cultures in the different countries, you kept your love of reading, and there were some books, some novels that just touched you, and they seemed to coincide with what was going on in your life at the particular moment.
Yes, exactly. And I think when you're traveling, particularly if you're living in a place, if you're a tourist passing through, it's not so, it may not be so extreme, but if you're living in a new place where everything is different, you sort of lose your bearings sometimes, Your usual ways of recognizing yourself just aren't available. The language maybe, your friends, the things you usually do, the habits, all of that's not there suddenly. And so you can feel very vulnerable in those situations. And sometimes, if it's the right book, you can find your way through that time with the book as a companion. It might speak to your isolation, or speak to the place that you're in, or speak to, something about your life that is uncertain that you're thinking about. And so the book really is a solace. I mean, the way Miss Hughes said music would be, for me, it would be novels probably, or books, but it doesn't matter. It's just that you find something that accompanies you, and sometimes novels can do that,
By the way, I could relate to Norman. I could easily shove cake in my mouth and start giggling.
Oh, could you? I'm so glad you said that. I'm giving my first reading tonight because this is the day the book comes out, and that passage is one I was going to read. Do you like that passage?
I love it because I can relate to it.
Oh, I'm so glad you told me that.
I have had times in my life, and sometimes it's with Robin, where I can't stop laughing. I will just start crying. I'm laughing so hard, and I could easily see just prior to that putting cake in my mouth, like huge hands full of cake. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's. I'm so glad you told me that. Well, then I will read that tonight, and I'll read it confidently. I hope to. I hope people could relate to that. So I'm delighted to hear you could.
As a teacher in Nigeria, you assigned readings to the students that you were teaching, and since you have 2 children of your own, did you assign different books for them to read?
For the children to read?
Yes, for your children as opposed to the children in Nigeria.
Well, they were just infants at the time. Do you mean when they got older and I wasn't in Nigeria anymore? Maybe.
Yes.
I don't know. Those books that we read in Nigeria were really part of a program. It was still the English system from the English, because Nigeria was an English colony, and it was right after it had stopped being a colony. So for the first time, there was an African novel. There was Chinua Achebe with Things Fall Apart. But before that, it had been Jane Austen and George Eliot and so on. So this was new, and they loved it. But they loved Shakespeare. They loved lots and lots of things. But I don't think it was so different for my own children. Of course, I was reading children's books with my children, and these boys were 12 to 19, so they were sort of students and at a different place in terms of their reading. So it would have been different, but I don't know. I always gave, when they were older, I always gave them Things Fall Apart and some of those books that had been so fundamental, so important in my understanding. I gave the boys, or the boys were given Things Fall Apart, but they taught that book to me.
Really?
I didn't know I didn't know what it meant, They said, well, this means that, and this means this, and if you're wondering about this scene, I can tell you what that means. So they had the background. I didn't, because it's set in Nigeria. So I was a stranger.
That's amazing.
In Nigeria. So they were able to, explain. It would be as if somebody from, I don't know.
Like having footnotes.
Sorry?
It's almost like having footnotes in a book. If somebody's reading to you.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly the way it was. So that was a great help. Those students being able to explain things,
the other night we went to a storytelling event, and it was put on by a guy we know very, very well here in our community who runs the library. And the storytellers that he had invited were so good at telling stories, and I was wondering if I would have had, because I heard some stories I had never heard before, and I was wondering if it was better than reading. You know what I mean? I sometimes wonder when somebody reads you something aloud and they're very skillful at reading and emphasizing things.
Yes, it's wonderful.
The reading aloud experience for the listener is sometimes, I think, preferable to reading on your own.
It can be so wonderful when that happens.
So that's what you're doing tonight?
Well, I'm doing a reading tonight. The book comes out today, so there's sort of a launch, a reading tonight. And I've been having to choose passages. I read for about 20 minutes, then there's a question period, and then there's a book signing and wine and cheese kind of thing.
Where are you going to be? Tell us where.
It's going to be the Corner Bookstore, which is at Madison and 93rd Street on the east side of Manhattan.
Okay.
So right here in New York, and where the wind is blowing, I want to
go. I know we're a little far away, but don't worry, we can make it there one day.
I really enjoyed your relationship with Diana Trilling. I didn't know anything about her, and it was very moving.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I really, it was an amazing thing to be reading to her for that long time. We'd already been friends for quite a long time when we began to read. But the thing was that she was already in her 80s when we began to read. And what I didn't mention in the piece, but I wanted to have felt, but I didn't want to mention it, was that as we went on and the book grew shorter that we were reading, she was moving further into old age. And of course, there's this growing intimacy between the reader, the narrator, and Diana. And of course, the narrator sees her getting older and knows she's closer to death. So as the intimacy increases, so is the knowledge of the loss of this great friend. So I think that's what was sad about that. She was moving towards death. Of course, we all are moving towards death.
Yes.
Miss Hughes would tell us. But, you see, there she comes again. I hear her. She's never too far away. But yes, Diana was moving towards death, and of course I was in my 40s, but I thought I was so young. I thought I was very young. Being with somebody who's much older makes you feel younger too. So there was
always, yeah.
Don't you find that?
when I go to the beach, I'm so old. Right? Right? But when I go to my mom's church, I'm like a kid.
Exactly. I would say that to Diana. I'd say, "Oh well, I'm already whatever it was." She'd say, "You're just a girl, darling. You're just a girl." And I think, is that? I knew it was nonsense, but I loved it. I just loved hearing her say that.
Man, who wouldn't want to go? I would love to come see you tonight. I wish we were closer.
I wish you were. I wish you could come.
If you're listening to this podcast before tonight, some people listen to it before tonight. They could be in New York. Go to the Corner Bookstore. I just looked it up on Google, and it looks like a beautiful little building.
It's wonderful. It's at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock at the Corner Bookstore, and it would be wonderful if any listener could come. That would be wonderful.
I would love to see that store, Robin. We've got to check it out. We're going to be there in a month.
Yeah.
So we'll be.
Are you?
Yeah. Are you doing any? Are you doing any book readings the week of Thanksgiving?
I am on the 21st. Could you come?
Are we there on the 21st?
I think so.
What day of the week is that?
Are you really?
Yeah.
All right.
It's a Tuesday, I think.
That's a Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday. Could you come?
That's the day we're going to be there, right?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, yes.
Is it really? Okay.
What time are you going?
What I want to do is just tell you what it's going to be. Let me tell you just right now. I'm going to get on my website so I can tell you. It's in Chelsea, down on 23rd Street.
I know the area. Yes.
You do know the area?
Yes.
It would be terrific if you could come.
What's the address of where you're going to be in Chelsea?
That's just what I'm looking up on my website.
Okay.
The very, very second events. Okay, and I'll tell you the time. I'll tell you the whole thing. I have to tell you, it's going to be the 21st, the Cell Theater, 7 to 8, 338 West 23rd.
Okay, I know the area. 338 West 23rd. Okay.
Between 9th and 8th Avenue.
Okay, 9th and 8th. Okay, got it. Okay.
Have you got it? And shall I give you my telephone number just in case?
Not on the air. No,
Okay. It's
you can do it.
Okay.
No, don't tell it on the air. Wait till we're off the air, because unless you want to get, do you want people to call you?
Well, you know what I would love? I would love to do book clubs. So if anybody is interested in book clubs, I'm happy to talk to you. To your book club and all. So if anybody's interested in that.
All right. What's the name? What's the name of the place on 23rd?
It's called the Cell Theater.
The Cell Theater. Okay.
Cell Theater.
And the website we have for you is KathleenHillWriter.com. Is that correct?
That's right. That's it. And you can look it up, and you'll see events, and you'll see book clubs, and where I say I'd love to do some, and so on.
All right.
Nice.
You're
this
delightful.
Is exciting.
Kathleen, you're delightful.
Wonderful. This is great.
Anything I can bring? I mean, do you like tuna noodle salad?
Oh, this is so nice. So nice. How will I recognize you?
Well, Robin is pretty.
Right.
And I'm pretty big. Just
we'll introduce ourselves.
Just look for pretty and pretty big. That's all.
Great.
Yeah, this is great.
This is going to be wonderful fun. I mean, we're going to meet, aren't we?
This is exciting.
I don't think it will be blowing that day. Maybe it will be sort of a late summer day. You know how it goes.
Well, you love weather. I never met anybody who loved the weather.
You and Kathleen have stuff in common now because you love the weather too.
Willard Scott and Al Roker, those two guys.
What a riot! Oh my God!
All right, we need to say goodbye because we have other things to do.
But I'll see you again very soon.
We will see you on the 21st.
We have a date
in Chelsea.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Can't wait.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
We'll be right back.
Fox News Radio. I'm Chris Foster. President Trump has lunch with Senate Republicans today, and he's attacking one on Twitter who said the president should stay out of tax cut negotiations.
The president writing